Okay, good morning, Dad.
Good morning.
Today is Friday, February 21st, and there's so much that's happening, especially with Ukraine and Russia and Trump, but we haven't talked about the Middle East in a while, and I feel like we need to give a little quick recap because the last time we talked about it, Trump was saying all hell's going to break loose in the Middle East if all the hostages weren't released, and then all hell didn't break loose. Hamas released a few, and I'm
Yeah.
just having trouble kind of just navigating the Middle East now because I just don't, it's all speculation to me at this point. I just don't know what Trump's plan is,
Yeah.
what Netanyahu's
hmm
plan. So it's hard for me
Right.
to kind of digest what's happening there. So maybe you can just give us a little update on your assessment of the situation and then we can move over to Ukraine, Russia again.
Okay. Yeah, the hostages were released. I think there were three hostages, and the bodies of some other hostages were released on Saturday, according to the schedule that had been previously agreed upon. Um, Now, Hamas had threatened not to release them at that, because Israel was failing to abide by the other aspects of the agreement, in particular the humanitarian aid, and we discussed some of that. But Hamas went ahead and did it. Now, it was because of that threat made by Hamas that Trump responded with this all hell will break loose if you don't give all the hostages. But this is just Trump. I don't think he really even knew how many hostages were supposed to be released or anything. I think Netanyahu may have echoed him at that point, thinking, "Oh yeah, let's see, yeah, it's all the hostages." But per the agreement, it's three hostages. They were released, and so the ceasefire continues, but Israel continues to violate the humanitarian part of it. They are not providing. They haven't provided any of the housing units. And we're talking about something like 50, 60,000 of them, not one, and only 10% of the 200,000 tents. And again, we're talking about things that are essential for life for a lot of people in Gaza. A lot of people are simply exposed to the elements or just living in the rubble. So that's what's happening there. Yeah, and now I understand too. Negotiations are ongoing about the second phase. Now Netanyahu has declared his intention, of course, just not to do it. But it's not clear. He's in a difficult political situation. He's closely allied with these ultra nationalists, and I think those are his own tendencies too. That he's very much a kind of an ultra Zionist. Um, but there is much of the Israeli public. It's not that they're not Zionists and they don't really give a damn about the Gazans, but they want the hostages to come back. So they want the ceasefire to continue. So he's between that. I don't know exactly how it's all going to play out and where Trump is behind it, but I get the sense that in spite of his very fiery words, threat that he made, that he does want the ceasefire to go ahead. And I think what Trump thinks actually does matter to Netanyahu, whereas what Obama thought or Biden thought or whatever never really even cared. He's got to at least take into account what Trump wants, because I think Trump is in a stronger position vis-a-vis Netanyahu than previous presidents. So that's my best understanding of what's happening there in Gaza. But in the meantime, there much has been happening in Southern Lebanon. Well, the ceasefire there was supposed to, according to the ceasefire agreement that had been made there, the Israelis were actually supposed to withdraw entirely somewhere towards the end of January. They never did that. They extended it to February 18th. Now we're past that. And then they withdrew. Okay, they did make a partial withdrawal, but they have maintained, they built 5 military bases on high points very close to the Israeli border, but within Lebanese territory. And the other thing, so they haven't, they still haven't abided by their commitment. They have a toehold there in Southern Lebanon, what they see as maybe tactically important points, perhaps for a future invasion. And another thing they did is they just simply demolished all the villages that were under control. Some of them they took control of these villages after the ceasefire had been agreed to. They moved in and grabbed some of these villages, and then they just utterly destroyed them, demolished them. And so people are returning to homes that are just piles of rubble now, and beforehand they looted them. That's what they did. So they really gave Southern Lebanon, in a way, I guess you can't quite say the Gaza treatment, because, well, there the people have somewhere to go. So, most Lebanese were able to escape the wrath of Israel, and now they're returning and finding their homes destroyed. But, many were killed, and, let's not forget that. So it remains to be seen, what's going to, again, I think, there's no question that Hezbollah's position has been weakened, but Hezbollah still remains a formidable force. They really did, you'll have to say, defeat the Israeli invasion, the ground invasion. But they're in a weakened position, because they don't have the supply line, because of political changes within their own country. The supply line through Syria I'm talking about. Now Israel has these commanding positions, fairly minor ones in southern Lebanon, but very important ones in Syria, the territory that they seized there. They have now the Israelis have established 7 military bases in Syria on these mountains overlooking Lebanon. And so, again, the Israeli position there has been strengthened vis-a-vis Hezbollah. But clearly it's not over. We'll see what happens. Then we have to go to the West Bank. We often forget about the West Bank, but because quite naturally so much of the focus has been on Gaza and Lebanon. But over the last year and a half or so, the West Bank has suffered a real obvious uptick in violence. That there have been, I think it's close to 1,000 West Bank residents have been killed by the IDF. Many of them, like always, many of them actually children. And then more recently there was this attack on the Jenin refugee camp. I remember actually visiting there and spending an afternoon there, and it's just gone now. They just what they're doing in the West Bank is giving it the Gaza treatment. It's just utter destruction. So they killed quite a few people, but then just demolished the whole camp. And then there was a neighboring village. They destroyed that too. And it looks like Netanyahu is going to kind of surge into the West Bank, and there will be more violence there, more destruction. Just yesterday, there's three Israeli buses. They were empty in Tel Aviv, or a suburb of Tel Aviv, blew up. And so a lot of people are speculating that this is a false flag, because immediately afterwards, Netanyahu, pinned the blame on Palestinian terrorists from the West Bank and said he had ordered really an attack on them in the West Bank. It could have been a straight out false flag. Another possibility I just saw, I think this morning, that there was some Israelis, probably Israeli Arabs, they didn't give any names, that were arrested. And it's possible that, this was kind of an act of protest or vandalism or whatever, it's more than vandalism, but that was carried out by some people, perhaps Palestinians, again, who are Israeli citizens. It's not impossible. But if it is, it's a kind of a version of a false flag. I would call it a serendipitous false flag, because, these are obviously not West Bank people. And there's no way that Netanyahu could establish a connection, even before they were arrested. It doesn't make any sense. It's an incident occurs, and somebody's looking for an excuse, like a Netanyahu. He'll seize it and then, and do what he wanted to do anyway. It kind of reminds me of the Gulf of Tonkin incident. That wasn't exactly a false flag. It was actually the captain of a U.S. naval vessel reported that he was under attack, and then later realized he wasn't, and withdrew the report, explained, to his superiors that he had, they had read the situation incorrectly. It was just bad weather. And that's what it was. So he canceled his first report, but Lyndon Johnson decided just to ignore like the follow-up statement and just to go with the incorrect report first and use that as an excuse for launching a large-scale military operation in Vietnam. So I would call that a serendipitous false flag. It's not something that was planned ahead of time, but in essence, it becomes a false flag. It's just used. And that's, so, I think it's some version of a false flag that we're talking about here, that they're using this as an excuse to surge into the West Bank.
Was anybody killed when these buses blew up?
No, nobody was killed. Nobody was injured.
Yeah, makes it a little suspicious.
It doesn't
right?
really make sense, even from so I suspect that the Israelis just did it, and it was just an intentional false flag. I can't be certain, of course, but I strongly suspect it. And then I think maybe one other thing that we need to talk about in the Middle East is the question of Iran. And they had promised to retaliate against the last Israeli strike on their country. I think they call it True Promise 3. They carried out True Promise 1, True Promise 2. So, even using those terms, it certainly strongly implies that they really intend to do it. And apparently, I think just 2 days ago, maybe 3 days ago, a high-ranking Iranian official actually stated that, they're doing it. But so why has it taken so long? Well, I think there's, some possibilities is that, okay, they want to, before they get in an all-out shooting war with Israel and the U.S. inevitably, I think, they have to make sure that, they have all their ducks in a row. And we're talking about air defense above all. That may be part of it. But I think another part is that, these ceasefire negotiations became serious not long after they made, True Promise 3. And they did not want to upend those ceasefire negotiations. And now that the ceasefire is actually in effect and going forward, they don't want to provide Netanyahu with an excuse for breaching the ceasefire. So, again, they, according to this Iranian official and also Professor Morandi, they're certain they will do it, but they have to wait for the time, and this is not the time to do it. So let's say if Israel breaches the ceasefire in a major military way, goes back into Gaza, renews the attack on Gaza, then I think we probably see True Promise 3. So that's a kind of an outline.
Do you think that's where the flashpoint really is then? Is a re-engagement of the destruction of Gaza? I mean, it's already destroyed, but to sort of, move back into the IDF.
There's not much more to destroy. It's just
human lives, I guess.
Right.
And do you think that's more of the flashpoint, or is it the West Bank, or is it Southern Lebanon?
Yeah. Well, it could be any of them, to be honest. It could be all three. We'll see.
Do you think?
I think, again, it may be hard. I think Netanyahu really wants to go back in, but it's hard that now that he's pulled out to go back in for both domestic and international reasons, which we've discussed. So he may just, at least temporarily, direct his attention to the West Bank. That's something that, that's another goal. That's part of the Greater Israel Project. And then he still wants to get Iran. He's been... I think he was very frustrated. Like he felt like he had him, as that he could start that all-out war. But the Iranians were too patient, and then Trump got elected, and I believe there was some report that was leaked, I think, to Axios, one of those CIA linked outfits. So you never know, but said that there were actually talks, like within the Biden administration, they were considering an attack on Iran, and they came very close to it. But it was partly undone, according to some reports, by the incoming administration, and said they didn't want that, and they weren't going to support that. So anyway, at least the Israelis, heard that and probably made them reluctant to wanted to hold back. But they're always Netanyahu is always looking for an opportunity to attack Iran and to renew a war with them. So that's just always there, as a possibility.
Right. Well, the Iranians must be aware of that. So if they did do the retaliation now, especially now that it's been, 3 months or more since that attack on Iran, that if this attack was carried out now, it would immediately give all the fuel Netanyahu needs to drum up a joint U.S.-Israeli attack on Iran.
Right. I think there would have to be some provocation by Israel, or just or a really obvious breach of the ceasefire. They renew the attack, or an all attack on the West Bank, and that would say, okay, that would kind of that would provide them with the justification. They already have it, but it's kind of farther in the past and people are forgetting about it. So this will
exactly
be, right.
I think it's kind of they're waiting for that moment. If Israel goes in and blows up the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem, or
really certainly in that case,
if they do that, the whole Arab world's going to erupt. The whole Muslim world will. But
they might. I mean, I don't see it happening soon, but they really might. There are forces in Israel that are very close to the center of power. I think we're talking about Ben Gvir that are part of that movement, and so it really could happen. I guess maybe I just want to say one comment. Maybe we can say more about Middle East, but just looking at the future of Israel, just thinking about it, I think in some ways, Israel is definitely, I'll have to admit, in a stronger position than it was overall, let's say 6 months ago, mainly because of the fall of Assad. But again, it seized a strategically important territory. One thing about the land that it seized in Syria is that it's the source of something like 40% of the water in Syria, and I think like 30% of Jordan's water. Again, it just, they really have their, like a knife to the throat of these countries. So militarily they're in a stronger position, but you just look at the future of Israel, just not even considering these specific conflicts. It's just say, I think in the end that Israel's greatest enemy is itself. It's the crazies that are, rising in power, and they don't know when to stop. They will push it to a point where, the Egyptian government will fall, or the Jordanian government will fall, or if they go after the Al-Aqsa, they blow up the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the whole Muslim world will turn against them and will, throw caution to the winds. If they played their hand carefully, and Israel could last for decades to come, in spite of the obvious damage that it suffered. I think that it's put itself on a path of self-destruction. Eventually, it is going to fall, but it could last for quite a while if they're careful. But there are people in charge who are not careful, and we could see, again, just Israel self-destructing through extreme actions, even beyond what they've done in Gaza.
If they do something extreme, like blow up the Al-Aqsa Mosque, or go back into Gaza and, re-engage in this ethnic cleansing, what looks a lot like a genocide to most of the world, if they re-engage into something like this, it's like, well, what's the objective at this point? You've already destroyed all the infrastructure. Well, what are we doing now? You're going through just dropping bombs on people that don't even have homes anymore.
Right.
It's such a...
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. No, you're right. I mean, what they would be doing is just ethnically cleansing Gaza and seizing the territory. I think there was always that idea that clearly was held by Netanyahu and some of his allies. They were going to take at least northern Gaza. And that was the plan. It looked like they were working to, but I think, first of all, they found it harder than they thought. And the IDF was wearing down, and then they were getting pressure from the incoming administration, and then pressure again from the hostage supporters within Israel. So he had to just put that plan aside. But it's just sort of like the Iranian plan. It's always there, and it can be started up again at any time.
Do you think if something like this happens, if they go back into Gaza, they do something extreme in the West Bank, do you think that the U.S. will continue to stand by them? No, that the Israeli lobby has that strong of a hold that Trump, because Trump seems like a guy that what we've seen happen with Zelensky and Ukraine is just seems like he can change, you know.
Yeah.
I mean,
maybe,
I don't know.
Right, you're right. You know, I mean, I remember like when we were talking about what about Trump and what he might do. You know, it's very cynical. I'm surprised that he's done so much. You know, especially with regard to Ukraine and the relationship with Europe. But I always said, with Trump, there's always a chance. It's just like with Biden or Kamala Harris. You knew that they were just, I don't know what to say, like empty people. So they were just simply tools of the establishment, and they were never going to do anything, change policy in a significant way. That's who they were. You know, they had kind of sold their souls to the establishment, and the establishment was dead set on these objectives, and that was it. But Trump is his own man, and he could. You know, he's shown the capability to just change his mind and turn on people. And, you know, the problem again with Palestine in particular and the Middle East in general is that he has aligned himself very closely. There's no, let's say, there's really no dissenting voice within his administration. You know, like you could point to people like J.D. Vance and Elon Musk and David Sachs and others, you know, certainly Tulsi Gabbard, you know, with respect to Ukraine. You know, these are real dissenters. And he was talking to them. So there was reason to think that, okay, you know, maybe he could go this way. And it looks like he is going that way. You know, we'll talk more about that later. But in the case of Israel, you just don't find this dissenters. The only one that I can think of who I believe is a true dissenter on Palestine and is within his inner circle is David Sachs, who I think does understand. I mean, even the comment he made at that, he was sort of made this ambiguous comment about Palestine, but it just seemed clear to me. He knew what's going on. But he's, you know, the only voice, and I don't know if he's actually spoken. He's just maybe made the out of prudence has decided that this is a fight we can't fight now, but maybe we can win on other fronts. So it doesn't look good. You know, you don't have those dissenters, but you always have Trump. It just, you know, Mark Sloboda calls him a chaos bomb, and he just could go off. You know, he could even go off in Palestine. And there are just a couple of suggestions, you know, hints, you know, that he may not be completely on board with the Zionist project. You know, one was that Jeffrey Sachs video that he put up on Truth Social. Right. Yeah, and he kept it up there for, I don't know if it's still up there, but it was up there for a long time. And then the other thing is that there was actually, I don't know how many years ago this was, but there was some interview where he was talking, he didn't quite say it out loud, but it was obvious what he was saying. And that is, look, I've talked to people on both sides, meaning both the Israelis and the Palestinians. And I thought that like this one side was going to be really reasonable. The other wouldn't be, you know. And I found out it was the opposite, he said. And he just sort of like his eyes were getting real big. And you knew that what he was saying, it just seemed to me really obvious watching this, that, yeah, you know, he actually did talk to Palestinians at one point and found that, you know, they were very reasonable people and willing to make compromises and whatever. And they had a very good case. And it was the Israelis that were the fanatics. That's just essentially what he was saying. Now, this is like from years and years ago, but there just may be, who knows with Trump? It may be that, like with a lot of people, and I think you can say that with like Tulsi Gabbard, for example, they just made the decision like this force is Zionism is just too powerful. We can't fight it. And we'll just have to, we have to pick our battles. And it's true, politicians have to. And that politics is not a business for, let's say, philosophers or, you know, idealists. Politicians understand that they have to pick their battles and make alliances with really unsavory figures and forces. But if you do it right, you can actually achieve a greater good. And maybe that's what's going on in his head, or maybe he's been fully convinced of the Zionist project at this. I don't know. But he's surrounded by Zionists, and Zionism remains such a powerful, powerful force in this country that he just may be very, very, even if he gets really sick of Netanyahu and he starts to see that, oh God, I can't really even stand these Israelis anymore. He just might think, I just can't fight this fight. And he may go along with it.
Yeah, I think you can fight the fight. I agree with you that he has to pick his battles, and he's focusing on the Ukraine-Russia conflict. And what we said a couple weeks ago, that if Trump really wants to end this Ukraine war, he has to change the narrative. And that's what's happened. And that's what's been so exciting this past week, is we've had, you mentioned David Sachs. He reposted about Gonzalo Lira. And so did Elon Musk repost about Gonzalo Lira. The reporter that was killed by the Kiev regime in prison, and our State Department did nothing about it, for exercising his free speech. Tucker Carlson had a great interview with a guy named Bob Amsterdam that everybody should check out, that just really laid out just the horrors that the Kiev regime has been enacting on the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, and just everything, how the propaganda apparatus in Kiev has become so powerful, that how it controls a lot of the United States. But all of this is all of a sudden coming out. All these things that we talked about, I think I said just a week ago, like how everything is a lie. Everything is a lie. And I was just getting emotional about it. It's like, but nobody knows what we talk about. All these things, Minsk 1, Minsk 2, the atrocities in Ukraine, all the suppression of the Russian language, all this stuff. We can go on and on. Nobody knows about it. 90% of the world, Western world, is just ignorant. But all of a sudden, I feel like that number is now changed to 50% or something. Because all of these huge people, like Elon Musk just himself, and then Trump himself tweeting just about Zelensky being a dictator. You can see Western mainstream media is all they got their panties in a bunch right now, because they're trying to figure out, how do we spin this to make sure that we paint Zelensky in Ukraine as this, this really heroic, Churchill character.
Right. Well, but the whole thing. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, the whole thing, but the whole thing is a lie. So you can pop that balloon if you have influential people like Tucker Carlson and Trump, just speak the truth, and all of a sudden the whole thing falls apart, and it's done.
Like the emperor has no clothes, right?
Right, but the thing is, like, the Zionist narrative is one of the biggest ones, the biggest lie that this has been going on for over 75 years.
Yeah, well, one thing is, I've always said that, like, Ukraine, that there's been a lot of propaganda in Ukraine, but you just don't have people, with the exception of some odd individuals, like the guy who attempted to assassinate Trump at the golf course. You don't have people that are really fanatically devoted to Ukraine in this country. American citizens, you may have some Ukrainians that are that way, who have, but Israel's different. This is something that's built up, like you said, over years and through churches and lots and movies and whatever. It's really deep seated, and it's deeply entrenched, and it's going to be a much harder, let's say, force to take on.
Yeah, but if a light is just, you don't have to. I feel like you don't have to do much. You just have to shine a light on some of these things, And kudos to people like Tucker Carlson, who had, a Palestinian Christian pastor on and interviewed about just how this is, like, there's angles that you can focus on, just the atrocities.
Well,
showing.
I think you got to kind of go at it. You can't take it head on, but you can do things like Tucker Carlson's doing, and it just sort of gradually the truth begins.
It makes people think, plants that seed.
And I was just going to say that I think, we must give a great deal of credit to Tucker Carlson. Sometimes, like you're saying, you can be kind of frustrated with him because he sometimes plays along with the narrative. We're saying that earlier. But he has brought in a lot of dissident ideas. When I say dissident, I mean just a lot of reality that has been excluded from the mainstream media. And he's not, a minor force in the media. He's a major force. There are millions of people that watch him. And I suspect that he's had a real effect on, much of quite possibly people like Rubio and Hesketh and so forth. Because we're starting to hear them speak these forbidden truths too. And
Right.
I'm sure that he's played a role. I mean, I think we have to give credit where credit is due.
Yeah, I'm just the whole alternative media space in general. I know Joe Rogan hasn't really attacked the Ukraine narrative or the Zionist narrative at all,
Yeah.
but he is kind of adjacent to it by exposing the deep state and talking about all these. And that's the, like you said, it's something that's been going for 75 years. It's not something that can just turn on a dime. People's beliefs and ideologies that are so deeply entrenched. Like you said, it's a super tanker. It takes a long time to turn it around, but I feel like it's turning, and you can turn the Israeli narrative around, the Zionist narrative around, because at the end of the day, it's all false. It's this idea that somehow all these Arabs were just terrorists, and that Palestine was an empty land, and just
So false,
right, and just these. But also just the atrocities that have been committed by the Israeli government. It's just been so horrendous. It's difficult to defend when 70% of the people that have died in Gaza are women and children.
Right.
Like if you make there's no way to justify that position.
Right.
It's like if you were somebody that was holding a bunch of kids hostage at a school. You're like here in the U.S. and you're just like, well, okay, let's drop a bomb on it because we got to get that terrorist. Nobody would be okay with that. You can't do that. It's just not.
Right.
It's just indefensible.
Right. Yeah. All the hospitals, the schools, or whatever, 90% of them have been destroyed. Yeah.
Right. So
you can say, okay, maybe occasionally these things happen. War is hell. There's collateral damage, but no, not 90%, not 70% of the. It's just these figures just by themselves tell you something else is going on here.
Right.
In spite of these. Right. And I do. I mean, it's so horrible. It has leaked through to a lot of people who are on the fence, some people who were former supporters. It has had an impact already. It still hasn't it hasn't extended to the establishment. Let's put it that way. But I have hopes for people like, maybe Trump and J.D. Vance, that at some point, like Trump might sit down and watch and say, what the hell,
Right.
I'm not going to do, he's the kind of person who just might. I don't know but I think J.D. Vance is maybe I'm wrong in giving him too much credit, but I think he's a very intelligent and a fundamentally decent person. One thing I heard, of course he gave that great speech at the Munich Security Conference, and it was very well delivered. It was described as a diatribe and fascistic or whatever, but it was very, very calm. It was very well delivered. But, not only did he do that, but actually I learned from that interview you were telling me about the Amsterdam. He's the lawyer who's representing the Ukrainian, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, and just revealed the horrors, that are taking place there. But he said he and his team had gone and tried to contact all these senators, and none of the Democrats would talk to him. And he himself was like a liberal Jewish Democrat from Brooklyn, but this is what people who are actually principled are discovering. None of the Democrats would talk to him. Some of the Republicans would, or at least their staffs would, but there was only one senator that came out on the floor and spoke about the persecution of the church in the historic Church of Ukraine, the one by far the largest denomination. And that person was J.D. Vance. So anyway, I think this is a man of real principle, and I think, he's bought into maybe partly, there is a certain amount of self-interest and calculation, but he's been so inundated with the propaganda that he probably has simply believed that, the Israeli propaganda line. But if he ever, he does have contacts with people who know the truth, people like David Sachs, and maybe something will seep in. It's just like I used to not have any hope of that, but it just seems clear that actually, again, our alternative media space, which I think extends to from little people like us all the way up to Tucker Carlson, I think it really is having an impact. You just mentioned
100%.
Gonzalo Lira. See, if you didn't have any sort of some kind of foot in the alternative media camp, you wouldn't even know about Gonzalo Lira, because he was not reported. I mean, you have to go to the back page of some newspaper, and it was a nothing burger, just some guy who did some stupid things and he got sick in jail, and so what's this? But Elon Musk and let's see, who else was it? It was that.
David Sachs,
David Sachs, yeah, right.
But
they knew. Well, we know David Sachs is very much connected with alternative media. Like he's been a guest on the Duran.
Right. When I was listening to when he was on that All In podcast, which was a great podcast, he's not on it anymore because he's busy with the Trump administration. But he said that the Duran was the #1 podcast that everybody needs to listen to.
Well, again, that's another reason why I think David Sachs knows about what's going on in Israel, because the Duran, does report honestly on what's going on there.
Right. Yeah. No, it's a fascinating time. Maybe like it just the power is being taken away from the elites and the mainstream media, and it's coming back to the people. That's so great. And ironically, everybody that's upset about this are yelling, "This is a threat to democracy," when we're finally having some semblance of democracy where people can actually speak their mind and speak the truth, and it's starting to seep through. Right. But one thing that just sort of just makes me realize that in the long run, I think the Zionist movement is doomed. The Ukrainian Banderite movement is doomed as well, because of just their dehumanization campaigns that they've led. It just doesn't succeed if you go so far to spend so much energy to just dehumanize the Russians to such an extent. Like you see it on Twitter and X, like they're orcs. They're not even humans. They're to make them subhuman and say that and celebrate their death of civilians, of children, of women. Like you laugh at it. And you see the same thing with the Israelis have been doing for such a long time, just dehumanizing the Palestinians, saying that they're just evil people. They're these guys, they don't have a right to live. They're subhuman. They're animals. They just use that language. If you adopt that position, it will bite you. It will come back and bite you, because it becomes indefensible. At some point, you can't hold that narrative forever. You can't just reduce a whole group of people, a population, to subhuman status and think that will fly. Like it's amazing how long it has.
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to say. It's kind of disturbing. But
inevitably, I think you adopt that position, it will destroy you. Is there any?
Yeah, well, it will destroy you. I'm not quite sure exactly how. Because I was just thinking, when I was listening to Amsterdam talk about, his experiences, firsthand experiences, and in Ukraine, it's something that we're aware of. We've talked about. There really is. I think it's almost fair to say a totalitarian regime now. Calling Zelensky a dictator is not a stretch by any measure. I actually, there are a lot of dictators that I would rather live under, rather than Zelensky. But these things have been going on for a long time. It began, actually well before the launch of the SMO or the invasion, whatever you want to call it, and in general, there's just been a deliberate choice on the part of European leaders and the European media to look the other way, and it's now like it's just become extreme. Again, as Bob Amsterdam pointed out, this is something like the actual banning of a church. This is something that hasn't happened in Europe, since the 40s, World War II early.
Right. Nazi Germany, right.
Right. It really, and the fact that it's happening and that there's not a peep of protest. He's talked about how he's tried to like speak at religious liberty conferences, and he's denied a platform, or and instead you have people that are actually actively involved in the persecution are given allowed to hide under the banner of religious liberty. Everything is turned upside down. but the thing is, these people are complicit in all this, just like so many of them are complicit in the genocide. Some people really don't know; they've been fooled, and they've been too trusting of certain media outlets, and they just don't know what's going on. So, but there are clearly people that know, and I know Bob Amsterdam pointed out, like he knew what was it, certain reporters and whatever who just knew, and then just said, "Oh, I can't talk about this." Just killed the story, went on with some anti-Russian narrative. That's what's happening. It's been a conscious choice. There are people, a lot of people, again, powerful people, well-connected people in Europe and the U.S. that have been complicit in these horrors, whether we're talking about Ukraine or we're talking about Gaza. And that's kind of scary. You hope, by shining a light on it that, this whole spread of these ideas or, their complicity is going to be exposed. People will react with horror, and maybe that's what will happen. That's kind of what you're suggesting. I hope. But then my other worry is that we're, again, that we are seeing, a very disturbing kind of union between, some sort of version of woke liberalism, 21st century wokeism, and this ultra nationalism, and because we are seeing it. You find it in places like Ukraine, and that's where it's being brought together. It just seems like it's impossible. You suggest this 20 years ago, but it is happening, and hopefully it's just it's such an awful sort of monstrous hybrid that is kind of being formed here, that people will see it and it'll be the end. That's what I hope. But then there's this fear that it's going to grow. But anyway, what Trump is doing, with regard to the Ukraine. Earlier we were talking about the need to change the narrative. You just have to, because that's really what the narrative in the postmodern, world that we live in really shapes reality. So if you don't go after it, like you can negotiate a treaty like the JCPOA, but you didn't change the narrative. The Iranians are still evil. So it's just very easy to reimpose, to the sanctions and tear up the treaty. And the same thing could be said, we were saying, for Ukraine. But the narrative has taken a real beating in the last few days. It's not quite the way that I hope, we talked about things that they can point out. But some of it is like the corruption, right? And he did call him a dictator. I think they need to go farther, because they've linked all of it to the failure, of Kiev to hold elections. I think that's actually kind of a minor point. The main thing is what we're talking about: the banning of the main church, the press gangs on the streets, the banning of all the political parties. That this actually, again, these things began, not the press gangs, but the banning of political parties in opposition or critical or independent media outlets. That began well before the SMO, and it's been going on. And that's really what makes Ukraine a scary place. And it's all, in the end, at least there was some sort of ideological justification. But now it's really just become about Zelensky and his gang, because it's not that he's got rid of all these, people that were maybe for negotiations with Russia or these leftist parties. He's got rid of all of them, and it was just the Maidan parties and other Maidan politicians like Poroshenko. But now he's going after them. He's actually part of his same, movement, you can say, but they're not on the Zelensky team. It really has become a dictatorship, that wields tremendous power and terrorizes its own citizens, as we can see from videos every day. So anyway, calling him a dictator is great. I think we, like with Trump, things are personal. So he really, I think part of that's what's going on too. Is just Zelensky, like you were saying, or I've heard other people say, he's built up as this Churchillian figure. And the whole thing was absurd. It was just sort of like Joe Biden being sharp as a tack, or or a lot of the nonsense that was spoken about Kamala Harris. And I think this is another case. It's just like, again, where you had the establishment media circling the wagons, right? In this case, around Zelensky, who was always really a very flawed person. He was not Churchillian, in any sense of the word. He was, an ex-comedian who really lacked some very basic, diplomatic and leadership skills. You could see that. I mean, he seemed to think that he could. He's offended a lot of world leaders. I've heard stories about, how was very disrespectful towards Lula, the president of Brazil, or Modi, the president of India. And I think it's probably well known that he's really a rather unpleasant character. But, we had to hide that. Just like we had to hide facts about Biden or Kamala Harris. And, it was our duty, any criticism was a Russian talking point. But we kind of see the breakdown of this particular personality cult created by the media, just like we saw the breakdown of some other ones. In retrospect, you go back and say, maybe like the opening, the first crack in the edifice of the establishment media was Joe Biden. Like they had gone all out to pretend the guy was the sharpest attack and everything, and then the thing blew up in their faces, and they had to admit it. And so now it's kind of happening with Zelensky. Like, this guy is, he's the new Churchill, and then you see, this guy's an idiot. Like, anybody who stops and say, okay, even if you think that Trump was wrong to say what he said, that look, you're the president of a country that's just utterly dependent on U.S. support. It seems like anybody with just a bit of common sense. You don't have to be some sort of political wizard. You just don't insult the guy on whom you depend. You don't bite the hand that feeds you.
Right. Well, what do you think is going to be the fallout of all this? Because as these European leaders double down behind Zelensky, and they say, like you said, he's this Churchillian figure, and they keep on doubling down on this completely false narrative. And as the truth comes out that not only is he not Churchill, he's actually quite a monstrous character that has been terrorizing his population, that has violated all basic human rights laws, has, suppressed all opposition parties, and it's just absolutely horrific, and just destroyed the country. What do you think is going to happen to all these these countries and these people that have just kept on fueling this narrative that yes, this is Zelensky, cover of Time magazine, he's the great hero, and then we find out that it just becomes undeniable that it's all a lie as more and more truth comes out. As we're starting to see happen, the dam is breaking with this narrative. And instead of saying like, oh man, there's some things that are questionable, they can at least say that, like, he's not perfect. There's some things that we agree. They don't even do that. They just, we got to turn on all the spin machines. BBC News immediately saying their fact-checking team out to say, no, it's not true. He's not a dictator. He's actually a great guy. And people are just like, come on, guys, meet us halfway at least.
Yeah, or do some honest reporting, right? Yeah,
right. So what is going to be the fallout for Europe, for everything? How is this going to?
Yeah, well, it is another blow to the narrative, to the establishment. It clearly is. Because I don't think Zelensky's days are numbered. It seems clear to me. I don't see how he can survive this. The only reason that he could get away with all this, of course, is that he had the unquestioning support of the West. And I think it just puffed up his pride to the point where he thought he could get away with anything. He was in the habit of insulting Western leaders, and he just always got away with it. Sometimes there's a little bit of pushback. I think he called well, it wasn't him. Okay, it was a previous foreign minister. Called I think Olaf Scholz did like liverwurst or something along those lines. It just you don't do that especially if you're a foreign minister. But the Ukrainians do. And Zelensky above all. But they could get away with it because they were just so important for the narrative. So that he could, this ugly side could always be suppressed or spun or whatever. But eventually, as we've seen in the case of Biden, in his dementia, you just can't hide the reality forever. What I've heard is that actually, Trump and a lot of people on his team have really, even before they came to power, there was, they pretty much formed a consensus that this guy is, he's just a pain in the you-know-what, and be good for him to go. And then you saw that he was even, like, it wasn't stated openly, he's still always praised in the media. But remember, like, his first address to the Congress, there was all these standing ovations and everything. The second time he came, nobody really wanted to talk to him. They said, oh, yeah, he's a great guy, but I have something else to do. So there was always already the sense, I think there are two things going on, is that, yeah, he's not such a great guy. And then, just looking at the person. But the other thing is, hey, he's not going to win this war. He's losing it. And I don't really want to tie myself to a losing cause. So, both of those things are happening, and they're going to, I don't think he's going to last much longer.
Yeah, I heard that I saw this morning that the U.S. is stopping all arms sales to Ukraine. So if that's the case, I don't know how much is already kind of in the pipeline that's still going through.
Yeah,
but,
I'm not
this
clear
war
about that. I think that was a report from a member of the Rada in Ukraine.
Right.
So it may be true. But I don't know. We'll have to see if that's confirmed. But I think there's a good chance. Again, I think we've always said that there's a better chance that the U.S. will just walk away. And this will make it easier because now there are a lot, there's so many people, Trump supporters, who never had a real strong opinion about Zelensky, but probably pretty much agreed, oh, yeah, great guy, whatever. And now that he's got in this fight and he's insulted Trump, that's it. There's a huge part of
You don't do that.
Yeah.
If you want to win over the MAGA crowd, you don't want to.
Well, right. So, so now it just makes it much easier for, still going to be somewhat difficult, especially if, depends on how far the Russians go. If they start going, they cross the Dnieper and so on. We've talked about all that. It could be really hard, but it's certainly strengthened his position vis-a-vis Ukraine. Trump's position is going to make it easier for him to walk away from this. So it's good news as far as that goes.
Maybe can you step back and do like a big picture when the history books are written 50 years from now, 100 years from now, when we look back on these two conflicts with the Ukraine-Russia war and this Israel-Palestine situation, how is this going to paint just the Western world, and how will we look back on this? And will there be do you think there will be an acknowledgement that this was a great sin by the West? That what we engaged in was, we were this symbol of goodness and purity and morality, and we engaged in something so manipulative, evil, nefarious, and just how is it going to be looked upon, do you think?
Well, I certainly hope. I think eventually this establishment is going to fall. Now, the establishment itself will last a lot longer than Zelensky, the man. But it's just sort of like that's another crack in the edifice, we'll say. And eventually it will fall. And so, I think there's so many things about it, too, that are just so contrary to human nature. I mean, we've talked about, the extreme nationalism, their alliance with these really, ugly groups that are contrary to every stated principle of theirs, right? They again, we're talking about the Israelis but also the ultranationalists who really do rule the roost in Ukraine. That's going to be a dark mark that I think will be acknowledged in the future. And then the extreme wokeism. It's just this crazy thing. Well, you see, I think Trump just recently declared, that dads are males and moms are females, or vice versa.
What a brave
just like
statement.
they have to say that. This is just. I think they've really gone down a really, just in it's absurd, and it's also, just anti-human path on many different levels. And you can call it left wing or right wing, but I think it actually is something of its own. It's really neither left nor right. It's a very strange ideology that they have formed over the years and have really devoted themselves to. And I think they'll go down because partly it departs so far from reality in so many ways. Sometimes we're just talking about the reality of the war, and at least there's this kind of a really encouraging return to realism in the this new administration. People like Hegseth saying that, hey, we just have to talk about what's really happening. Let's do that now. Okay, let's stop playing this game. Or J.D. Vance was again, restated something that he stated before the election. I think it may have been like a good year ago, where that look, it's just that this is a war that Ukraine can't win. And he says it's just that Russia has the advantages in so many ways, and they're not going to lose those advantages. And so let's just be realistic. Okay, let's not, it's not somehow more moral to pretend, to ignore reality. The consequence of ignoring reality is that just lots and lots of people are dying. And many more will if you continue to ignore reality. So, we have to, this is encouraging. And, hopefully, again, I think that in the end, reality wins. Sometimes, again, these ideological zealots can hold on for a disturbingly long period of time, but they always fall in the end. And, we'll look back on this and say, geez, what happened here? These people were nuts.
Right. Yeah. You told me just how Western civilization was in one shape or form, the sort of dominant civilization for 500 years. And then Russia moving over to China has kind of fundamentally changed that. But just seeing I'm just thinking how Western civilization is going to be viewed. It's just, I guess it's never been. There's always been problems with it, with the imperialism,
right, there have always been dark
colonization,
chapters,
right. But will this be one of the darkest chapters? Do you think of our history, or just kind of putting things in perspective?
Well, we'll have to see how it ends. It could, if we. Maybe we can dodge a bullet. There could be horrible consequences in both Europe and Israel that we could tie ourselves to. But at least in the case of, Europe, we'll see. Even within Europe, I think we see a fracturing, and I think that's going to continue. I don't know if there's going to be this kind of these dead ender Europe, certain countries that just will not let it go until they just completely collapse, and
right.
How far they'll go. It's hard to say again, what was there, 55 million or 60 million deaths in World War II? It's hard to say that we can compete with that now, just in the terms of the number of the dead. But
I guess,
but just the absurdity, the degeneracy, the stupidity is just kind of on a scale that it's never been on before, I think.
Right, the stupidity, and also what makes it so sinister in my mind and dark is how we have weaponized human rights and morality itself to carry out these atrocities, to support evil. We use it under the guise of being moral and caring about human rights, and we support just what can only be described as evil in these situations. That's what, to me, just makes it gross. But maybe that's how it's always. Maybe that's how they always justify it. I don't know. Maybe that's just how things always work.
Yeah, well, there's that's right. And nobody ever declares that, no government ever declares itself evil. They're always fighting on the side of good. And I think, the truth is that they convince themselves of that. That's really how it works. You really do think that you are the force of good. It's just like, Israelis said that we are God's children, and And so anybody that opposes must be, just servants of the devil. And it's really very, no different in different secular settings too. I mean, it's just kind of used a slightly different language, but that's what it is. There's a sense that, we're always kind of I think the Western establishment, like I think I've said a few times, is just so certain of its own supremacy. Whether in every especially its moral supremacy, that that anything that opposes it is evil. They will use different language than Israeli extremists, but it's kind of comes from a similar place. I was just actually thinking that we're seeing, I think in both cases, we're seeing kind of an echo of World War II. That it's a narrative that really took shape during World War II and was strengthened thereafter. And, part of it is this was all about the persecution of the Jews. The Jews are the eternal victims. And then what we have to guard against is the rise of a new Hitler. And this becomes kind of the prism through which everybody looks. They have you should have a much broader understanding of history and even of the World War II conflict. But that's what it's become. It's kind of been really narrowed down to these things. And it's just used to justify all kinds of really evil actions. It's obvious in the case of Israel. We are the victims, so how can you even dare to criticize us, what we're doing in Gaza? You're obviously an anti-Semite, and all kinds of people echo that. And it is a product of World War II, or it's just sort of it's something that's been passed on down to us from World War II. But the same thing you see in Europe, vis-a-vis Ukraine. It's just like Putin's a new Hitler. It's always 1938 and it's Munich. It's just like, no appeasement. That's the only lesson that we can learn. And we just have to repeat it again and again. That's the sense of what, kind of gives us a sense of our own moral goodness. We can, and so these are, they become, these are ideas or more than that, just sort of interpretations of history that have justified a lot of really unjustifiable actions. And here we are a good 80 years later, and we're still kind of, for certain people, are just stuck in that same mold, looking at history. But things have really changed, it's obviously they have, and you just have to have some sort of flexibility to get out of that that very narrow view of things and look at reality. Just don't always, when somebody's described as a Hitler, don't jump in line and assume that he actually is. He's a historical figure. We're living in different times, and the Jews of Israel today are not the Jews of the 1930s or the 1940s. Their position's very different, and you just have to see that. You have to just kind of let go of these things and stop living, repeating these so-called historical truths.
Okay, well, let's end it there, Dad.
Okay.
All right. Have a good rest of the day and a great weekend.
You too.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.